Yeah.
Hey, Jesse,
Yes, John.
just remember that if and when they come on, you need to go up and pin them.
In them.
Yeah,
Okay.
that way their screen will
Yeah.
stay focused.
Right.
All right, I'm going to turn this on for Pam, and
Okay.
you just remember to unmute it.
Right.
All right, I'll be back. All right, thank you.
It might have been.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
No, I'm talking.
Hello, man. Good morning. Okay.
Come on.
Greetings. Thank for his feet.
Well, no. Oh, my goodness. Yes, it is. Want to chime in? I will. Good morning.
We're gonna have our.
When you do the introduction, why don't you sit here too? I'll start off here, but this is, gets us on this camera and on the microphone here. Okay.
You like how we are? Yeah, I like that too.
Good morning. You're muted there.
Good morning. I know.
Harold Rice is here with me, and we'll be getting started at 9:45.
Excellent.
Appreciate your doing this for us. Look forward to it. It's going to be a great program.
You think so?
Hey, Bob. You want to sit down here? Say hello. Hello, Dr. Carter.
Hello.
How you doing?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Is he playing through something? Because we can't hear it. Yes, we need to be able to hear her. I think the original sound is off. Yeah, but that means that it's in through the microphones here. Someplace we ought to, when she speaks, we ought to be able to hear her through the PA system here. Oh, John. Dr. McCarter, do you have a presentation you was going to share?
I do.
Okay.
Would you like me to go ahead and do that?
And is Judge Tross joining you?
She will be, yes.
I can hear it. We can't hear you. Yeah. I don't know where. Let me see, try to find John. Well, we did get one show. We did get one present the show.
Really? Well, isn't that great? So I bet you're relieved.
But I would have still enjoyed the conversation.
Okay. And you know you've got a backup if he doesn't talk for long, or she, or whoever.
Right. Dr. McCarter, could you speak again so we can get the sound together?
Sure. What would you like me to say, friends? Good morning, good morning, good morning. Happy Sunday.
Is it?
Is that audio better?
We can't hear you at all. Can you hear us?
I can hear you perfectly.
Okay. I am wondering if it's an issue on your side. Give me 1 second. I'm going to run to my office. But I'll be right back, Dr. McCarty.
We can hear them.
We can hear you, and we're at home. But maybe she can't hear us.
No, I can hear you as well.
Okay,
I
yeah.
don't think it's I do Zoom quite a bit. I don't think
Yeah.
it's on my end.
Yeah, I don't think it
No.
is either.
It's not on ours.
There's that.
Dr. McCarter, can you try speaking again?
Absolutely. And we
Okay.
just heard from Ginger that her audio is working fine. She can hear me. I can hear her.
Yeah, I'm in my office now. So I know it's not you, it's us. Give me 1 second.
Take
Thank
your
you.
time. No worries.
Susan,
Yes.
Susan, I have to ask, did you refinish the cabinet behind you?
We oiled it, but no, it came just the way it is.
We refinished one. They're just beautiful.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Does it have a white top or wooden?
The countertop is,
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah, that's what they are. It looks just like the one we refinished, but that's much more beautiful. Ours was a little older.
this one's pretty old.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, ours was more decrepit is maybe the word. Took a little bit more.
We had to have a breadboard made, which cost us $40, which was almost more than the cost of the thing.
Than the
Right,
cabinet,
right.
but it's very beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Good morning, Judge Trosh.
Yeah.
Hey, Dr. McCarter, can you say something again?
Sure. Good morning. Good morning. Happy Sunday, everyone.
Okay, we've got to get this volume up. Hey, Dr. McCarter, can you rename the Davidson College Presbyterian Church 216 as host?
I will do that.
If you go up to the 3 dots in my window, thank
I've
you.
already, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Hey, Gordon, the stuff for Brenda's seat is in there. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
The organization, them by name.
All right. Dr. Carter, can you speak again?
Of course. Good morning, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Hope everyone's staying warm on this beautiful Sunday morning. A little chilly.
Go ahead and say something again for me.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. The school to prison pipeline. We're glad you're here to learn more about it.
One more time, sorry, we're having a little technology.
Yes, I'm happy to help. Good morning, happy Sunday. We're glad you're here. Welcome to this presentation on the school to prison pipeline, presented by Race Matters for Juvenile Justice. My name is Susan McCarter, and we are joined by the talented and equally beautiful Honorable Judge Elizabeth T. Trosh.
Just
Good morning. Testing. 1, 2, 3.
keep on speaking. Sorry, we're trying.
I'm gonna start singing happy birthday in a minute because I'm running out of, material. All right, so good morning, everyone. Welcome to Race Matters for Juvenile Justice, our presentation on the school to prison pipeline.
We're dealing with our audio here, so if you have a little quiet while we try to get this adjusted and underway.
One more time, sorry.
No problem. Testing. 1, 2, 3. Race Matters for Juvenile Justice.
You get it
School to prison pipeline. And we'll invite anyone who's participating, if you're at home, if you're at the church with technology, we'll invite you to participate in the chat. We would love for this to be as interactive as possible, but know that our time is brief together this morning. So if you have access to the chat, we encourage you and invite you to use it. We're glad you're here.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for indulging us here. I'm going to open us with a brief prayer, and then Harold Rice, CEO of the Ada Jenkins Center, will introduce our program. And we do thank you so much for your patience here. Gracious God, steel us against self-righteousness. We have learned not to judge others by the color of their skin, but we stand before you today, products of a history that has produced institutions that produce mass incarcerations and define young people as criminals, irreversibly crippling them as they try to participate in economic systems steeped in white privilege. We can and we must do better. In the name of Jesus the Christ, we pray. Amen. And with that, I'm going to ask Harold to come and introduce our program.
Good morning, everyone. Today we have Judge Elizabeth Trosh and Dr. Susan McCarter, who both are working with Race Matters for Juvenile Justice, and will come to us today with a presentation around school to prison pipeline. Race Matters for Juvenile Justice is an organization that's pretty near and dear to me. And at some point, if you can go to their website, and perhaps look at some of the events and workshops around racial equity. I think it will definitely enlighten you. If you can, I don't know if they have any virtual workshops at this point, but if you can make Dr. McCarter says they do, it would be eye-opening. Race Matters for Juvenile Justice is a collaborative leadership group working within our community to reduce disproportionality and disparate outcomes for children and families of color through institutional organizing, education, and workforce development. So without further ado, I'll bring to you Dr. Susan McCarter and Judge Elizabeth Tross.
Well, I've wished you good mornings about 50 times this morning. So again, so thankful that you're here. Judge Trosh and I are looking forward to talking with you. And we hope that you glean a little bit from the presentation from our time together this morning. First, I want to apologize. Race Matters for Juvenile Justice and our Speakers Bureau is very deliberate about our teams that present. And I don't know in the history of our Speakers Bureau that we've ever had two white women present together. First, I want to put that in the space. I want to put a disclaimer out there to say, Elizabeth and I have done this presentation many times together, but always centering our colleagues of color, their voices, their experiences, their expertise, etc. So I'm sorry that you kind of got the dregs of our team, but we'll do our best this morning. This is an overview of what you will be delighted with today. And the way that we start all of our presentations is to tell you just a little bit about how we came to the work. Because I'll be speaking first, I'll invite Elizabeth to tell you how she came to this work. I'll do the same, and then we'll launch full throttle. Elizabeth?
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm very humbled to have the opportunity to talk with you all about the intersection between race, school policy, and the prisons. And when we talk about prisons, also, I think even more specifically about the overuse of detention and incarceration for young people in the juvenile system as well. I came to this work as a judge presiding in juvenile court, and candidly making a lot of mistakes and missteps in my efforts to understand the challenges and problems that children and families in juvenile court were navigating and struggling with. I think it's fair to say that I did a lot of harm because I did not know what I didn't know about the structures and the systems and how they were and were operating to erect barriers that I had never really encountered and didn't fully understand. And it really has been through this intentional partnership amongst court leaders, I think I want to say now probably 12 years ago, really looking at and trying to understand disparities in the child welfare system. And we kind of started out with a one-year goal, which we did. Every year, kind of identified a goal in child welfare, improve child welfare outcomes. And in our partnership with a national organization, reduce disparities in child welfare. And as we tried to understand what that was and to first develop the analysis, the real organizing principles and understanding of what drives disparities and inequity in a system. And through that work, I would say that I really do feel like my eyes were open, the veil was lifted to a history that I had never heard, into its present day manifestations, the present day manifestations of white supremacy and racial oppression. And I could see so clearly my own role as a judge and as a gatekeeper in a court system in perpetuating those that legacy. And I couldn't be complicit anymore. And so that's how I came to this work.
Thank you so much. I am not a judge. I came to this work actually in the city of Richmond, where I was a mental health therapist, forensic social work practitioner, working with at-risk youth. I will tell you, I've raised 3 youth, and I've never met a single youth that I didn't think was at risk of something. So that moniker was a little strange to me. From that work, I served as a juvenile probation officer. I went back to school and have worked ever since on what we used to call DMC, or disproportionate minority contact, and now the racial and ethnic disparities in juvenile justice. I was very blessed and fortunate to move to Charlotte, North Carolina, meet some like-minded folks, and start this little group that's grown into Race Matters for Juvenile Justice. So again, we're thrilled that you're here. And without further ado, we're going to launch right into our program. If there's somebody, maybe somebody from Ginger's house, you guys had great audio earlier. Would one of you, dear souls, read us this quote?
In these days, it is doubtful that any child may reasonably be expected to succeed in life if he is denied the opportunities of an education. Such an opportunity, where the state has undertaken to provide it, is a right that must be made available on equal terms. Chief Justice Warren, Brown versus Board of Education, 1954.
So these are the Chief Judge's words in 1954, and they couldn't hold more true in the year 2022. Thank you, Ginger, for doing that for us. So what is the school to prison pipeline? It's nothing more than just the pathway between the education system and the juvenile justice system, or the adult criminal justice system. As many of you know, in December of 2019, the state of North Carolina finally raised their age of criminal responsibility. Prior to December of 2019, all 16-year-olds were treated as adults, and we've begun to raise the age to 18 starting in December of 2019 for a limited list of offenses. When we talk about school-based offenses, we're talking about anything that happens at or on school grounds, school property, at a school bus stop, or at an off-campus school-sanctioned event, or in the rare event that the school is the victim of a potential offense. And the example that we provide is in the event of a bomb threat at school. In the state of North Carolina, there are 16 mandatorily reported offenses. Before you guys hopped on the call, Ginger and I became fast and furious friends, so I'm going to use her as my example again. If Ginger were, just probably a week or so ago, if she were to attend her high school and she were to bring a knife to school, her principal would have no option but to call Raleigh and say, Ginger came to school today with a knife. Having a dangerous weapon is a mandatorily reported school-based offense. You can also see that there are less dangerous mandatorily reported offenses, including possession of an alcoholic beverage, etc. You can see the list here. Obviously the bolded ones are the more egregious, more violent crimes. Now, what I want you all to think about a busy street in Davidson, maybe a main thoroughfare that you drive down. And I want you to imagine if you were driving down that thoroughfare, let's say at 11 o'clock on a Saturday night, and you saw some blue lights up ahead. You might think, and you could see that traffic was slowing on this thoroughfare that usually moves pretty solidly. And you might think, oh, there's a traffic stop, or there's an accident, or there could be a DUI checkpoint. And what we know about DUI checkpoints is every single car that comes through that checkpoint, the driver is subject to breathalyzer or to discussion with law enforcement. Doesn't matter what kind of car you're in, doesn't matter the color of your skin, doesn't matter what your zip code is or who your mama is. Everybody who comes through that checkpoint is going to be subjected to the same type of questioning. That is the idea behind these mandatorily reported offenses. Now, I want to tell you the statistic of all of the school-based offenses. What percentage do you think, and you can pop it in the chat or say it out loud, what percentage of school-based offenses do you think are for mandatorily reported offenses for these 16 that are listed here? What percentage out of 100%, what percent do you think are for mandatorily reported offenses? And if you're in that big group together, just like hold up a number or say it to your neighbor so that you're participating as well.
80.
Anybody have a guess?
80.
80%. Actually, it's 3%. 3% of all school-based offenses are for mandatorily reported offenses. That leaves 97% that are not what you see here. And I will tell you, those 3% are proportionate by race and ethnicity, just like our DUI checkpoints. They are proportionate by race and ethnicity. For the 97%, are those proportionate by race and ethnicity? Absolutely not. And so as a researcher, what we see is as the level of discretion increases, the level of disproportionality also increases. These are the factors that affect the school to prison pipeline, the school and school environment, the policies of that school, including most specifically zero tolerance policies, high stakes testing, exclusionary discipline, race and ethnicity of the student, sex and sexual identity and sexual orientation, your socioeconomic status, your disability status, all are factors in the school to prison pipeline equation. So I'm just going to really quickly run through these in case any of these were something you didn't know. Zero tolerance policies are supposed to remove discretion. What we've learned is they don't. They started with the Gun-Free Schools Act, and you can see that 94% of all US public schools have implemented some type of zero tolerance policy. High stakes testing focuses education on the results of testing and standardization across schools. We saw this with the No Child Left Behind macro policy. And it really has had some negative effects with primarily teachers and assistant principals, et cetera, trying to remove low-performing students, et cetera. Exclusionary discipline is anytime a student is denied the opportunity to participate in the school activity, in learning for that day. If your in-school suspension removes you from the learning opportunity, then it is considered exclusionary discipline, as obviously are out of school suspension and expulsions. We know that children of color are overrepresented in school discipline. Very important to note, they are overrepresented at a rate that does not correspond to misbehavior. It is not predicted by difference in offense, etc. We're going to talk to you about a groundbreaking study in the state of Texas, and we'll show you how they came to those findings. We also know that children who are members of the LGBTQ plus community are overrepresented, as are gender expansive youth in school discipline. We often find that they are victims of bullying. And as you know, it's sometimes the retaliator that gets caught. So oftentimes they will act out in ways in response to being teased or bullied at school. We know that poorer children are also overrepresented in the school to prison pipeline. But Skiba and other researchers, Russell Skiba is a very well-respected and national author and scholar for school to prison pipeline. And several of his studies have tested socioeconomic status up against race and ethnicity. And the effects of socioeconomic status are there, but much less robust, much lower predictor of school discipline than race and gender. Disability mental health are also put you at greater risk of participation in the school to prison pipeline. So children with mental disability or physical disability are suspended at a rate of 2 times what their differently abled peers are, and they are 75% times more likely to be expelled. You can see our little infographic here depicting an actual schoolhouse and then the prison with some fun facts for you. And now we're going to get into what Elizabeth's brother-in-law likes to call the Ms. Pac-Man, or the Pac-Man part of the presentation. So buckle in, because it's about to go pretty fast and furious. And I want you to watch what happens to these pie slices. This is the United States population in 2018. And again, if you have the chat open, or if you can unmute yourself, just kind of tell us what you see here in the population broken down by race and ethnicity. Who makes up the biggest slice of the pie? Well, interestingly, they're not listed on our legend on our graphic. So I need to go back and make sure that you can tell that that yellow or cantaloupe piece of the pie is actually white folks. So my apologies for not having that in the legend. But you can see that white folks make up 60% of the US population. American Indian or Alaska Natives are about 1.3% of the population. Asian folks make up about 5.9% of the population. Black, African American at 13.4%. Hispanic, Latino, Latinx, 18.5%. Multiracial at about 2.8%. And Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander at about 0.2% of the population. So keep this in mind as kind of your barometer as we move through these statistics. For the same year, this is public school enrollment at the United States level. So what happened here between what you saw in our population and what you see in public school enrollment? Our white pie slice has shrank, and our African-American pie slice has grown, as has our Hispanic Latinx slices of the pie. Why? Why is this happening? Well, the first is a mathematical reason. Older folks tend to be whiter. Younger folks include more individuals of color in the United States. It's a small piece of what's happening in this, but we need to make note of it as good statisticians. The larger driver in the change in these statistics is folks who homeschool their children, folks who send their children to independent schools, folks who send their children to parochial schools, and folks who send their kids to charter schools, depending on whether or not your charter school is a public school. If your public school is, if your charter school is not a public school, that's affecting this pie chart. All of those categories of folks tend to be whiter, not without exception, but the general typical nature of those data are that whiter folks are more likely to homeschool, parochial school, independent school, etc. Now let's look at who is identified as gifted and talented. You might be saying to yourselves out loud in the pew, a collective, So are we saying here that whiter folks are smarter than children of color, than students of color? We have no, pardon me. We have absolutely no evidence to suggest that white students are smarter than Asian students, Black students, Latinx students, Native American students, etc. What we do know are that standardized tests are more likely to be Eurocentric and biased. What we do know is that white parents are more likely to fuss and contact the school if their little Susie wasn't identified as gifted and talented. And what we also know is that there is teacher bias in who is selected for being identified as gifted and talented. Now let's start to look at the other flip side of the pie chart, and that is who gets in trouble at school. So this is one or more in-school suspension. But that is not the graphic for that. Is that the same graphic as, oh, so I copied the wrong pie. My apologies, but you will see when we get to out of school suspensions that the graphic looks like this. And what you tend to see is an absolute upside down pie from what you saw in the gifted and talented, because now we're seeing that bias. Now we're seeing that discretion, but it's playing out in who gets in trouble, who gets suspended, etc. The study that I referenced earlier, Judge Trosh has read this study as well. It was really groundbreaking in that it was conducted in Texas, which has a very diverse student population. It's also a very big state with a lot of students. So there were almost 1 million students in this study, and they had the same exact breakdown of mandatorily reported offenses at 3%, hovering right around 3%, with the discretionary offenses at 97%. We see that's the national statistic. That is actually also our North Carolina statistic. So 3% and 97%. For almost 1 million students, they are able to match students on 83 different variables. So they could take Elizabeth and I. If Elizabeth and I were the same race, the same age, the same zip code, you can think about every variable, all those contributors that I showed you. And statistically, with 1 million students, we can find another student that had the same EOG scores, that had the same family income. And then we could vary Elizabeth and I by race. And with just that one variation, if Elizabeth and I committed the exact same offense and Elizabeth was Black, Elizabeth would have a 33% higher likelihood of being suspended, expelled, or having school discipline than me looking like myself. So when we try to answer the question, is there a correlation between getting in trouble at school and ultimately coming into contact with the juvenile justice system? The answer is yes. For the students who have been suspended or expelled just once, they have a much higher likelihood, a 1 in 7 chance of being in contact with the juvenile justice system. And that is 1 in 5 Black students, 1 in 6 Hispanic students, and 1 in 10 white students, as compared to 1 out of 50 students who never were suspended or expelled. So then what can we do about this? Judge Trosh is going to do the heavy lifting and tell us about what we can do to make this better.
So I think that the data, I think, paints a very clear picture around kind of what drives what we would refer to as exclusionary discipline, excluding a child from their learning environment. I do actually want to just take a moment to talk about kind of what that looks like for kids, because I've interacted with hundreds of children, both in my role presiding over delinquency cases and also in my role presiding over child welfare cases. And in my role as serving as a volunteer truancy court judge in 3 different schools in our district, working intensively with families and school social workers to really try to understand what's contributing to student absences and trying to provide supports to keep kids on track in school. So what so for example, one student comes to mind very clearly. I was working, volunteering at McClintock Middle School in the truancy court, and working with a lot of different kids. We had kids who maybe had struggles getting to school because there was domestic violence going on in the home. And mom was trying to get the perpetrator out of the home, which was causing the family to have to be out of their home, staying with relatives, living in a car in order to try to get to safety. I've seen kids who were missing school and having trouble in school because the family is homeless and transient and struggling to provide transportation or even to access transportation because they were not stable in their living situation. But there's one kid that I just saw him, from start to finish, from the kind of early intervention in the truancy court at the clinic all the way into my courtroom downtown. So this young man was not only missing a lot of school, but he was also getting suspended quite a bit. And he was in the 8th grade. He was about 6'1", had full facial hair. He didn't look like other 8th graders. And his family was going through a lot of instability and just chaos in terms of their family structure, because they were immigrants. They had come from South America, and mom was had been arrested and was facing deportation. He was living with his grandfather and really suffering from the separation and loss of the mother, the uncertainty of what his mother's situation would be and whether they would live together. And he was also just kind of a misfit in this student body. So we, worked with him to try to put some supports in place to try to help address some of the grief and the loss and the challenges that he was dealing with. And then, he matriculated on to high school. And so a year or two later, I saw his name on my docket for truancy, like for formal, like truancy kinds of cases. So if kids are just not responding to these interventions and are not coming to school and they kind of meet the criteria for excessive absences, they can be brought to court as an undisciplined juvenile for their truancy. So here he is, he's on my docket, and we kind of go through the whole thing with his absences, and the assistant principal stands up and says, I need you to get him to just cooperate and to behave and follow the rules. I was like, well, what's going on? Well, he intentionally comes to school with his pants sagging and violating the dress code. And he knows that he's doing this and that we're just going to suspend him. And so, he's been suspended however many times because of his failure to comply with the dress code. And I listened to this and I looked at him and I said, I get the impression you don't really want to be at school and that you're coming to school dressed like that because they're going to send you home, and then you don't even have to skip school because they're going to make you go home. And he's kind of like, yep. And I said, well, I think if they were really serious about keeping you in school and wanting you to be in school and attending, then they would, rather than send you home, they would make you stay in order to participate in your instruction. And that's the problem. Suspension is easy. It's easy to kick kids out, to just say, I don't have time for this. I don't know what your problem is, but I can't deal with you. And I need you to get out of here so that I can, focus on the students who are behaving, who are complying, who are paying attention. And that's a real stressor and a real struggle for teachers and administrators and for students in school. And I think it's important to acknowledge that. But it's not effective at keeping kids in school. It's not effective in helping kids benefit from their academic instruction and make progress. And it's not effective in addressing the issues that kids are bringing to school. So there are really two kinds of categories of interventions, and we're going to kind of just speed through the school-based ones. So that's what this slide is. So first, schools can implement, and largely at the elementary school level, positive behavior interventions. You may have heard about this, but positive behavior interventions are strategies to support students at every level. These interventions are backed by research to target outcomes schools want to see. And those are outcomes that are achieved through data, through kind of systemic practices that are put in place. And they are data-driven outcomes set by students, families, and school personnel, and really focused on improving student behavior, fewer discipline referrals. So positive behavior interventions are going to be things like I saw with my kids in elementary school, where everybody maybe comes in on green, and if you complete your tasks on time, or you turn your work in on time, then you stay on green. But then, there might be, if you get into, if you disobey the teacher, or you talk out of turn, or disrupt the class, then you might get moved to yellow, but have the opportunity to do something to move back on green. So these are ways of sort of setting standards of behavior and interactions with peers and teachers, and reinforcing them through rewards, So that's one example of positive behavior interventions. Well, I'll go ahead and talk about restorative justice and then talk about trauma-informed schools. So restorative justice practices, I'm sure you've heard of them, but in the school setting, I think they're particularly powerful and important because restorative justice starts with the principle that when a student does something, like maybe steals something from a peer or a teacher, or even gets into a fight, or engages in bullying behavior, they've caused harm. They've caused harm to another person. They've also caused harm to the school community, right? By breaching kind of the social contract. And that harm needs to be repaired. And just sending a kid home for 5 days doesn't fix the fact that there was a fight. The conflict between those peers continues until or unless something is done, and I think importantly, facilitated by adults to help them resolve that conflict. I'm going to give you my own personal example of this. My youngest son was, when he was about, I think he was in, I want to say he was in first or second grade. He was always my like cheerful kid who woke up like really excited to go to school and see his friends, and always dressed and ready with his backpack early to get in the car and go. And he started I think it was in the first grade in like November, just to drag, like not get up, not want to get dressed, which is constantly prodding him. And after several days, his mood and his demeanor deteriorated significantly. He just kind of seemed to be a little bit depressed, and he didn't want to go to school. I was actually out of town at a conference, but my husband found him sitting under a table in the foyer and, really tried to, express compassion and try to understand what is going on. And he did not want to tell him what was happening. Eventually, he said that there was a boy at school who was just every day, particularly at recess, basically engaging in bullying behavior, threatening him and his friend, punching them, fighting them on the school grounds, and generally creating this situation where they weren't free to just play at recess without him exercising or exerting some sort of control over their interactions and their access, to the basketball court or the whatever. And so, we're like, well, have you talked to the teacher? Have you talked to anybody at school about this? And he said, no, and I don't want to, and I don't want you to. You're just going to make me look bad, and it's going to get worse if I get him in trouble. So, of course, we did go and meet with the assistant principal, and we were very clear. We're not asking you to discipline this child. We're not asking you to suspend this child, but we want you to know so we can try to work something out that can resolve this. The teacher ultimately was able to, or the assistant principal was able to ultimately work with my son and the other children involved and facilitate a meeting where they were able to kind of explore the issues that were going on. The kids who were being harmed were able to talk about how it was affecting them and what they needed, and they were able to come up with a resolution together. So restorative justice really is best for everyone because it gets to the root of the problem. It gives kids who've caused harm a greater degree of accountability to the people that they've harmed, and it gives the people who've been harmed an opportunity to guide the resolution that really makes them feel whole again. It's also what research shows is that what in schools where restorative justice is effectively implemented, teachers have less stress in the classroom because classroom behavior improves dramatically. And then finally, trauma-informed schools are an important strategy, particularly in communities across our country like ours, where children who are socioeconomically stressed and isolated, children who are growing up in communities where there's a great deal of risk of exposure to violence, are struggling emotionally and need a school environment that feels safe for them and helps them to be able to calm down, to be able to feel connected in order to benefit from their learning environment. And there's really great information about trauma-informed schools and trauma-informed practices. So we'll move on to what the court's role is in all of this. One of the things that we see is that when school resources are in schools and we have these zero tolerance policies, then we see an increase in court referrals for honestly a lot of normal kid behavior, right? Like getting into conflicts and disagreements, even fights, bringing, alcohol, cigarettes, drugs to school, and it increases the number of cases that have been referred to the courts from the 70s until today, which means our court dockets are stressed and we're dealing with stuff that doesn't necessarily really scare us or threaten public safety, and maybe isn't appropriate for court intervention. And so we move toward court-led collaboration to reduce these referrals and try to increase the capacity of schools to handle these kinds of behaviors at the school level, so that in court and with juvenile justice resources, we're focusing on the kids that really scare us. Next slide, please. So school justice partnerships are partnerships that are formed under court leadership with school districts, with law enforcement, with prosecutors, with juvenile justice, to try to, frankly, disrupt that school to prison pipeline by focusing on referrals to juvenile justice for things that, if they were done by an adult, might be considered a crime and put a child at risk of being adjudicated as a delinquent. So Clayton County was really the first county, this is a county in Georgia, that implemented school justice partnerships. And over 10 years of implementation, what they saw was that they were able to reduce referrals to court by 67% and reduce specifically referrals for youth of color. What's really important is not only does this reduce the burden on the court, which is one consideration, but what these partnerships have done is lead to a reduction in overall juvenile felonies in the community, a reduction in the presence of weapons on campus, a reduction in kids being sent to detention facilities by 86%, and a commensurate increase in school engagement, attendance, and graduation rates. So the school justice partnerships really help to target interventions that can be effective at addressing issues at school without funneling those children into our juvenile justice system and our courts. In Mecklenburg County, we have an existing collaboration, Race Matters for Juvenile Justice, who we represent today, which is really an organization of many government, nonprofit, and private organizations focused on creating a community in Mecklenburg where the experiences and the outcomes of kids cannot be predicted by their race or their ethnicity. So this was a very natural collaboration to advance the work of school justice partnership in Mecklenburg County. Race Matters for Juvenile Justice seeks change through these 6 dimensions, and these dimensions focus on institutional organizing, institutional data-driven practice change. But we also work with youth and community to understand how our systems operate and to share the power in the strategizing and decision-making process around change in our institutions. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. These are some of the partners and formal and informal of Race Matters for Juvenile Justice. As I said, this is an organization with deep involvement by the school district, by local police departments, and many of our child welfare and juvenile justice organizations. All right, so CMPD actually initiated some youth diversion in 2013, and then in 2013 through we developed a formal partnership called the School Pathways Partner Program to establish a diversion program for school-based offenses in Mecklenburg County. This was necessary because one of the, and actually we got law enforcement to the table when we brought all the different police chiefs from Davidson, Pineville, Huntersville, Matthews, Mint Hill, Cornelius, and Charlotte to the table. What we heard, especially from the town police departments, was, you know, it's all well and good for CMPD to do something like this because Charlotte has all these resources, but we don't have the same resources. We don't have access to the same things that Charlotte has, and we would like to have that. I heard police chiefs from the town say, we don't want to arrest kids, you know, for possession of marijuana or for school fight if we have an alternative. But we don't want a situation where our choices are arrest or do nothing. We have to have that in between that responds to what a kid has done in an effective way without unnecessarily entangling them in the justice system. And so this was our opportunity to bring folks together and to really create a program that could benefit children across our county, across our school district. So it didn't matter if you lived in Huntersville or if you lived in Mint Hill, you would have the same opportunities and the same access to resources and diversion to hold kids accountable without funneling them into the court system. So these, it is a process that is driven by school resource officers and managed by school resource officers in the schools. Next slide. We have, when we met to talk about and develop this program, we focused on the kinds of lower level offenses that are, one, not mandatorily reported, and two, are things that we can respond to effectively at the school without court intervention, and the kinds of things that don't really, don't really scare us. That's what Judge Teskey, who was one of the co-founders of the first School Justice Partnership, talked about. We want to figure out how to deal with kids who make us mad in supportive and responsive ways so that we reserve our court system for the kids who really scare us. All right.
So at this point, we should probably skip the CMPD.
Yeah, we'll skip all the data. What I think is fair to say is that in our implementation in Mecklenburg County, many, we've had thousands of children referred to school-based diversion. We have seen significant reductions in recidivism rates for youth who are diverted. We've seen kids who are diverted perform better, improve attendance and academic outcomes. And more importantly, what we have seen is a real shift in how school resource officers view their role in a school. When we first started this partnership, one of the things that I remember just finding myself coming up against constantly with some of the law enforcement partnership members was this question of whether you should only get one bite at the apple, or whether we should have a graduated kind of diversion program where maybe you get more than one bite, and we incrementally increase the interventions. Eventually, we just settled on one bite at the apple because that's where we had consensus. Within 2 years of implementation, one of our school resource officers, who is the most suspicious that this kind of approach would be effective, became our greatest champion. She became the champion for graduated responses. She reported about how this kind of approach totally changed her relationship with students. That students, even after they completed diversion, came to the officers just to check in and talk about things that were going on. And it gave school resource officers a greater opportunity to understand what's going on in the school and to be proactive and preventative rather than always responsive.
So we would love to hear from you and see what's on your heart and mind, see what questions you may have for us.
Just speak it out, and then Harold can speak it into the microphone so everyone can hear. Any questions?
I'll start off with a question if I can. Thank you guys for your presentation. My question is around teachers in CMS and other schools. What training are the teachers being provided with as it relates to implicit or explicit bias when it comes to behavior issues or what have you versus having them stay in the class versus sending them to the principal's office?
So I'll actually kind of pull back and talk a little bit even before the training because, and I know Elizabeth can speak to that as well. One of the unfortunate unintended consequences from the No Child Left Behind legislation was that it actually changed teacher preparation education. So as you know, I'm at UNC Charlotte. I'm in the College of Health and Human Services, right across the courtyard from the College of Education. And my colleagues in the College of Education had a change in their curriculum as a direct result of that legislation being passed. So what happened was they had more course content courses that they took in college. So when they were preparing to be teachers, if they were going to be a math teacher, they got 2 more classes in math. And where they found that space in the curriculum was by taking out courses such as multiculturalism, such as classroom discipline, such as DSM courses, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, or, as Judge Trosh spoke to, trauma-informed services and care. Those were seen as softer courses, and that preparation was taken out. Then you saw the move to discipline instead of being delivered in the classroom by the teacher or even at the assistant principal level. It's again, as Judge Trosh spoke to, it's a lot easier to open your classroom door, call the school resource officer down to come get Susie or Johnny out of class. Elizabeth, do you want to talk about CMS's relationship with RMJJ and how they attend the 2-day phase 1 training?
So CMS has been, even through, a lot of transition and leadership over the last several years, a very engaged and committed partner with Race Matters for Juvenile Justice. We work with the Race Equity Institute out of Greensboro to host 2-day race equity workshops, which are really focused on the history of structural racism, white supremacy, and racial oppression. CMS has been committed for almost 10 years now to bringing their executive staff and school administrators through the workshops and other school leaders. CMS also had at one point had a formal partnership with the Winter Institute to provide implicit bias training and instruction for teachers. I think it is fair to say that an institution like the schools, like the court, has to have an institutional strategy for continuing education, continuing engagement, and also for using tools that mitigate the influence of implicit bias. I think what research shows is training is helpful, and education about implicit bias, research has shown, does change attitudes and behaviors and can help reduce the influence of implicit bias, but it really is best coupled with structured decision-making tools that organize discretion around objective principles. So for example, I mean, a really great example, frankly, is impaired driving. When in the adult criminal justice system, I was working with our adult partners to kind of look at what's driving disparities in our system. We looked at what are people getting arrested for, and what are the rates, the relative rates of arrest for Black and white individuals. And what we found is huge disparities in every arrest, right? Marijuana possession, larceny, assault, resisting an officer. The only place where there was no disparity whatsoever, the only offense, was for impaired driving. And, I really was interrogating that, trying to understand what's going on there. And what it is that DWI arrests, stops, searches, and arrests have been so heavily litigated in our appellate courts that the courts have provided very clear, specific direction about what objective observations justify a stop, a search, or an arrest. So the decision-making is organized and structured around objective criteria. So it's really important that those two things work together. And I think it's fair to say that CMS has more work to do to institutionalize some of those principles and practices. As frankly do the courts.
Thank you so much, both of you and all of you. And we need to let these good folks get on to the worship service. So thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Jessica.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you both. Oh, good.
I think I need to